recording? Yes, awesome. I think we are recording successfully. Hi, everybody. My name is BJ Dramby, and we are here to help you through AP World History Modern. All right. Last night, for those who came, we did units 1, 2, and 3. That is a third, if you will, of the 9 units of AP World. For those who missed last night, do understand we have these recordings, so you can go hit up those recordings and fast forward at times, rewind at times. They're there for you. I see that Kimura's here, Audrey's here, Josh is here. Joshua Ho, thank you. I'm not really a goat. I'm not Heimler. We could all hope to be. Over on the side in the wing, we have Amy. She's going to give a big wave. She's going to be working through the material tonight. And we also have some of our student hosts, Deborah, Cynthia, Angela, and Adeline. They're going to be monitoring the chat. They're going to be working with you there. And they're also going to be helping you through some student quizzes that they created. So we're going to be getting out to you the review guide. It was kicked out last night. You should be able to access that. But I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Let's get started. We are on night 2. I'm going to go ahead and put the captions on. I'm going to do everything slowly because I'm older than all of you. All right. Thanks, Matt. I am locked in. Let's do it. All right. So we are in AP World, a great course. I think it's one of the best. We are diving into units 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, like some really good meat, good juice, good stuff. And I hope you love it because this is why we're all here. So last night we didn't get unit 4 done, and that's where we're going to be picking up. So please, can you find some time to follow at Think Fiveable on your social media? Tonight, we're going to be going into units 4 through 8, and it's going to be a team of us helping you out. Please remember to use the chat effectively. So we did push out some notes. We're going to make sure we can get that link out to you again. We do have Cram Hub. You're going to find that if you go to Fiveable's website, they have study guides for all the different units. Unit 1, the Global Tapestry, was written by me. I'm very proud of that. Tonight, you're going to be using the group chat to say hello, to talk about your feelings, and you're also going to use the group chat to ask questions. Feel free to do that. There is a Q&A tab. You can use it. That will pose questions, but I would probably just use the group chat the most. I think that is the easiest way to roll. Community. That's what we are. We're all trying to get somewhere so that this Thursday we're feeling good about ourselves. So let's be supportive. When somebody gives a comment that is right, let them know that. Go ahead and like their comment. And when somebody is wrong, feel free to help them out, but we're going to be doing it in a nice way. Now, you need to be patient. We're going to have tech issues. We're going to have little things that flop here and there, and we're just going to take a breath and move forward. And finally, and I say this very wholeheartedly, we're all people. So let's be kind. Be kind to Amy and I as we stumble through our words, but be kind to each other in the chat. I think it goes without saying that we should not be sharing any personal information with each other. So last night we had to delete a bunch of emails and phone numbers and personal addresses, and we're going to continue doing that tonight. That's not the purpose of this event. We are going to be offering up $100 if you share your cram experience. Feel free to mention my name, BJ Dramby. I love that. But more importantly, use at Fiveable Crams and tag at Think Fiveable in the post or caption so that we at Fiveable can recognize you. And of course, maybe reward you. So tonight, don't laugh, but this is our agenda. We're going to hit a unit, then do a quiz, hit a unit, and then do a quiz, so on and so forth. So let's dive into transoceanic interconnections. This unit is what I would like to say in summary, how everybody between 1450 and 1750 plays in a sandbox. At this point, we've studied China, we've studied Dar al-Islam, we studied gunpowder empires, we've looked at the Tokugawa shogunate. How were they all getting along? What brought them together between 1450 and 1750? And the answer tends to be trade. So here's the first thing I want to make sure we connect, that there were certain technologies in Unit 2, like the compass, like shipbuilding, like the astrolabe, that impacted Indian Ocean trade network. Well, that same technology, not necessarily being the lateen sail, but now being caravels and galleons, are going to make their way into Unit 4, where we're going to be not just crossing the Indian Ocean, but we're going to be crossing the Atlantic Ocean. So when the worlds collide, we have something called the Columbian Exchange. So let's all focus in on the Columbian Exchange. By definition, the Columbian Exchange is the exchange or movement of biological. It could be humans, it could be food, it could be plants, it could be disease. The Columbian Exchange is not the movement of ideas. You are not allowed to say that the Columbian Exchange brought the Enlightenment to the Americas. Don't do it. So, yes, it did bring smallpox from Europe through the conquistadors to the Aztec and the Inca and the Americas. Let's zoom in on that. Before the Inca were losing to Pizarro, the conquistador, many Inca had already died because of smallpox, meaning smallpox traveled faster than the horses and the conquistadors. Now, besides smallpox wiping out anywhere up to 90% of the Native Americans, let's talk about food. One of my favorite foods, things I put in my mouth, is coffee. And I love coffee, and coffee has brought trade between North America and Latin America. But we have to know that coffee is not from the Americas. It's actually from, let's just say, East Africa, like Ethiopia. That Columbian Exchange creates a whole new global market in the Americas. Another one, sugarcane. Sometimes you take sugar and you put it in your coffee. You can see where my head is, everybody. Sugarcane creates an entire business in the Americas. For example, Cuba. Cuba will grow a lot of sugarcane, so much so that they were decimating the Native American population and had to import slavery. Sugarcane is not from the Americas. It is from Afro-Eurasia. So the Columbian Exchange leads to slavery. Now, that's the type of stuff we want you understanding. We don't want you regurgitating that sugarcane is new to the Americas. So what? So that's where I wanted to go with that. I saw a lot of you posting comments about the potato. Yes, this is a great AP World comment. The potato is from the Americas. It was brought to Ireland, and then eventually there is the Irish potato famine. Something more of, let's say, the 1800s. But the Irish realized that the potato can grow very well in Ireland. And then the British, who held Ireland as a colony, if you will, demanded that their rent be paid in potatoes. So now we have an Irish potato famine because of the colonization of Ireland by the British. And then, of course, many of those Irish came to the Americas. Holy goodness. That is so much AP world. It's crazy. So the Columbian Exchange was actually an LEQ a few years ago. If you want to just Google Columbian Exchange AP World LEQ, you'll not only see a prompt, but you will see responses to that prompt. Now, I'm checking out the chat to see how we're doing, to see what type of comments we're hearing. Some people are writing some thoughtful comments. Some people are all over the place. I love you all. So I'm going to go back here. We're doing fine, it looks like. All right, I like the comments. Okay, so 5 major European maritime empires are going to emerge at this time. Yes, Unit 3 is called land-based empires. Unit 4 could be called maritime empires, but instead of using that type of language, they call Unit 4 Transoceanic interconnections. Good, I like it. That's fine. Portugal, Spain, England, France, and the Dutch were the first out of the gates. Portugal and Spain, I would probably say, do the best creating maritime trade networks throughout the world. Spain, England, and France do a great job, with the Dutch as well, hitting up lands in the Americas. The Portuguese, though they have Brazil, do not dominate the Americas at the time. So there's different ways of looking at empires. You have empires that are massive, like New Spain, like the Spanish holdings, the 13 colonies of the British. But you also have maritime empires that are small, little city states all around the world. And that's our next slide. So a maritime empire refers to the European global dominance of territories in Asia, Africa, and America from 1450 to 1750 through naval power. So feel free to read up more on a maritime empire. I'd probably say that the Portuguese, because of some of their holdings in the Indian Ocean trade, play a special role. In fact, if you Google Portuguese Maritime Empire DBQ, you will find a few years ago that was the prompt. And there were kids all over the world saying, I don't know what a maritime empire is. Because when they think of empires, they just think of land-based. And we have to think of, even though you're only holding a city state, holding Hong Kong by the British over there in East Asia was significant. Now, some of the trade routes are going to be new, such as the transatlantic trade route, the trans-Pacific trade route, but that still thriving Indian Ocean trade. I do want to comment that the Mediterranean Sea, which was once an ocean in itself, it helped define the classical age of the Greeks and the Romans. The Mediterranean really just gets bypassed. This is going to really weaken the Ottoman Empire, as everybody has realized they don't need to go through the Mediterranean. They don't need to even use the Silk Road. They can bypass it. Oh, so that's really cool. So we're going to jump into this one. This is going to be just an example of how East Asia responds to what's going on. So let me just make sure you're all getting it. It's one thing to talk about how Europe went abroad. I also want us to remember, how did those people respond? Because that's AP world. We understand that the Europeans are going to be imperialistic. Fine. But how did the rest of the world respond? How did Africa respond? Did they just say, go ahead and have it? How did East Asia respond? Did they say, good job, you can have our backyard? Of course not. And that is how I want you to view this slide. So on the left side, you'll see Ming China. Zheng He, a great admiral, a great sailor, went throughout the Indian Ocean trade and the East African coast. When he came back to the Ming did not feel what he brought was of value. The Chinese view themselves as both ethnocentric and self-sufficient. That's very different than the British. The British, though ethnocentric, they were not self-sufficient. They needed the rest of the world. So the Ming say, Zheng He, high five, great job. We are now going to dismantle our navy. We're going to break our ships down. No more will we have large boats sailing the Indian Ocean. And what we will then do is we're going to make sure that any European trading in Ming China and then eventually Qing China, the Manchu dynasty, has to trade all the way down in Hong Kong and Canton. Canton I often reference as Guangzhou, but you could say Canton as well. Now, geographically, Peking is up here, and Hong Kong and Canton are all the way down there. So the Ming were not saying you can't trade with us, but we're going to control the language of trade. That is powerful, that is ethnocentric, and it's going to lead to conflict. And we'll get to that conflict in our next units. On the right-hand side, how did Tokugawa respond? So the Tokugawa shogunate emerges in 1600. And in its first decades, Tokugawa Ieyasu and his son, they say, no more Europeans. We don't like their influence with their Christianity. We don't want more influence with their threatening gun, with their trade, with their possible opportunity to take over Japan. Remember, Japan is historically very feudal. The Tokugawa shogunate is a feudal structure. And the daimyo and the shogun can't tolerate opposition. So what you'll see being created in 1635 is the Closed Country Edict. Now, yes, Japan will still trade with East Asia, but in terms of Europeans, they specifically need to be cut out. There will be some trade occurring, but very far away from the capital of Edo, EDO, which is now what you and I would refer to as Tokyo. So let's review. The Asian response in China and Japan to this emerging maritime empire was to close themselves off in what can be oversimplified as an era of isolation. That's interesting enough. But what's really interesting is the long-term ramifications from that. All right. So I'm just looking through the chat. I don't see anybody asking questions that are like, I don't get this word you were speaking of. I love when I recognize some of the names from last night. Yeah, the Meiji Restoration is going to be a response to what I was just teaching. Ramification, it's an effect. What's the ramification of me punching you in the face? A black eye. I don't know why I went so violent. I feel protected by the computer. I can't go over the Tokugawa shogunate, but if you Google Tokugawa shogunate in Google Images, you're going to get a great visual. And no, Jeeve, I would never punch you. Ethnocentrism is a belief that your people, your country, your culture has the better way of life. So I'm going to say America wholeheartedly has been proven to be ethnocentric. The British possibly in the 1800s were even more than that. Jeeve, I said it now twice. I don't know what you win when that happens. All right, let's move on to our next slide. We're on to new African states along the Atlantic. I think I'm going to pass this one to Amy.
Okay, there were some questions about particular characteristics for each of your big five European empires that are mentioned in the curriculum. These are the important big five, like there's a lot going on in Europe at the time, but these are explicitly mentioned. So you want to make sure that you know a couple of characteristics about each of those big five. For Portugal, it's important that you know, so this is question number 29, that you know that it is a trading post empire, so that their empire is specifically designed based on taking over certain important port cities like Mombasa along the Swahili coast, Malacca with like the Strait of Malacca, and they end up paying Ming China for Macau. They have a monarch who sponsors expeditions named Prince Henry, and they also control Brazil, which is where you have the sugar plantations. And that's why they're very involved in the transatlantic slave trade. For Spanish, it's important to know that they are Catholic, and the casta system is very important. The casta system is that system of ethnic classification, which was established in colonial Spain in the Americas after they arrived. So the system of ethnic classification at the top are the peninsulares. Those are the people who were born in the Iberian Peninsula. But then you have a new group, the Creoles. The Creoles only come into existence because you have the interaction of Europeans with who are now born in the Americas. So the Creoles are fully European, but they are born in the Americas. And as a result, they're going to play a very important part, an important role, historical role in Latin America. And then, of course, the mestizos are the group below the Creoles, who are a mixture of the indigenous and the European population. So for colonial Spain in Unit 4, make sure that you know the casta system, and in particular the Creoles, as a new group that is formed especially after the arrival of the Spanish, that plays a very important role. And of course, the Spanish are the ones who, fund the expeditions of Columbus, so they have a very important role there as well. In terms of the other three European empires that you have to know beyond the Portugal and the Spanish, the Portuguese and the Spanish, you have the Dutch and the British, both of whom have trading companies, these joint stock trading companies, which is a new innovation. Instead of just having a monarch tax people and raise a bunch of money to fund an expedition, you can have private investors pool their money by buying fractional shares. So it's like an early corporation. By getting a bunch of people to come together, then they can help fund these expeditions. So the Dutch have the VOC, and the British have the British East India Company, both of whom are coming into the Indian Ocean and making a big splash. The British East India Company in India, and the Dutch with the VOC in the Spice Islands. The Spice Islands at this time are very profitable. And this is going to fund the Dutch Golden Age, where they're like doing all sorts of science stuff, like and also art. So this is a time period of the scientific revolution. This is a time period of Rembrandt, for example. Incredible. It's an incredible time. If you want to be anywhere from 1450 to 1750, you probably want to be in the Netherlands. And then, of course, you have the French. Now, a lot of students are familiar with like the fur trade and the French, but don't forget about Saint-Domingue, because we're going to come back when we talk about the next unit. Saint-Domingue is very important because they have the first and only successful slave revolt in world history. Saint-Domingue is currently called Haiti. So that's an important part of knowing the French Empire, is that they were very active in the Caribbean in these like colonies that relied on these cash crops like sugar, which were dependent on slavery. And that's an important world history lesson. No one wants to harvest sugar. Wherever there is sugar, there is slavery. You have to force people to do it. And in this particular time period, it's the rise of the transatlantic slave trade. So that brings me to this slide, which is how does the transatlantic slave trade change African states? How do they respond? And there's three different types of responses. One thing I want to note is that the opening up of the Atlantic is going to, in many ways, really open up global commerce, like this exchange that's happening in the Columbian Exchange. All of those crops are circulating in the Indian Ocean. The silver that is flowing out of the mines of Potosi in Latin America is being put onto ships, big ships called galleons by the Spanish, is going across the Pacific into the Philippines and then being funneled into China. I mean, China is like where all the silver's going, and then Chinese goods are coming out. So there really is like this thriving global exchange. In the case of one of our older trade routes, however, it enters into a period of decline, and that's the Trans-Saharan trade route. The Trans-Saharan trade route declines, which means that those empires in West Africa that were dependent upon Trans-Saharan trade also decline. So no more. There was like Ghana, and then there was Mali, and there was Songhai. Those are gone. And now you're going to have new states. States go where the money is. That's where people set up shop. What territory do they want to conquer? Where do they want to, create, like what territory do they want to control? Any sort of monarch wants to control a place where trade happens. And so now with the arrival of Europeans on the coast, trade happens along the Atlantic coast. And so that leads to new African states. So one of the new African states, like you don't need to know all of them. It is important to know a couple. Some of my students really like the name Dahomey because I guess it sounds like Dahomey, but whatever works for you, okay? Like whatever helps you to remember is fine. But the Dahomey, along with the Asante, are these new states that become very powerful, very wealthy. By 1700, Asante is the most powerful kingdom in West Africa. And how they become wealthy is because they give the Europeans what they want. They give them slaves, enslaved Africans, I should say. Now, where they get these enslaved Africans, each African society has some sort of internal slave trade. But at the same time, there are also a lot of competing tribes or competing states, I should say, because there weren't really tribes. There were like states already existing in Africa. So they went to competing territories and captured people to sell them to Europeans. So that's an example. Dahomey and the Asante get wealthy from cooperating with Europeans, collaborating with Europeans by participating in the slave trade. Now, some African states don't want to participate in the slave trade. A good example of that is King Afonso of the Congo. King Afonso wanted to trade with Europeans. He was fine with that. But he actually wrote a letter to the King of Portugal at the time and said, please stop taking slaves. You want trade? We'll trade. Catholicism, great. Religion's fine. All of the European stuff, fine. But don't take slaves. Now, the King of Portugal doesn't respond. So that's an example of an African monarch pushing back against the Europeans. And then the third thing is like outright resistance. A good example of that is Anna Nzinga of the territory of Angola, sometimes called Ndongo. There's a great extra history video on Queen Nzinga. If you guys like that Extra Credits YouTube channel, I love the one on Anna Nzinga. I always show my students that. So these are three examples of new African states. They are powerful and they are sometimes collaborating, sometimes negotiating, and sometimes pushing back. This is not a time period in which Europeans are in Africa in the interior. They're just hanging out on the edges. They have ports. They're along the coasts. But if Europeans go into the interior, they die because they're just not possible. Until the Industrial Revolution, until the next time period, Europeans aren't in the interior. Instead, they're having to deal with strong new African states who've developed along the coastline because that's where the business is. It's along the coast. All right, so now let's look at the next topic, which is I wanted to talk a little bit about, okay, we've looked at Unit 3 last night, the land-based empires, Ottomans, Safavids, and Mughals. And then we looked at some of the maritime empires, the European empires, the age of exploration, Asian isolationism, and new African states. These are the main topics for the period 1450 to 1750. Ways that you might be asked about this include causation, cause and effects. And you don't just want to say like, 1450 to 1750, Columbian Exchange. Like, why? How did this happen? Always explain. Explain it as if you were talking to a younger sibling. You're talking to, I don't know, a younger sibling in 6th grade. A younger sibling in 6th grade is going to challenge every word you say and say like, what do you mean? What is that? I don't understand. And so make sure that you can explain like, not just there was this thing called the Columbian Exchange, but why did the Columbian Exchange emerge? And the answer is that in this case, 2 different hemispheres isolated for tens of thousands of years, brought together because Europeans had new tech, right? They had the astrolabe from the Islamic world, the magnetic compass from East Asia, all these new ship designs. The Portuguese developed the caravel, and they had an incentive. They wanted in on the spice trade. They wanted in on all that commerce that was going on in the Indian Ocean. So they went searching for it. And then, of course, they also wanted to convert to save more souls, for Jesus, because they were super Christian. So the effect of the Columbian Exchange is globalization, depopulation in the Americas with a corresponding increase in population in everywhere. So population increases in Africa, population increases in Europe, population increases in Asia, mainly because corn and potatoes are really high in caloric value. All those carbs lead to population growth. But in the Americas, it's population decline because of disease. And then don't forget silver, 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 silver. That is literally fueling the purchase of goods that are circulating in the global economy. Also important to note during this time period are labor systems. So the rise of new coercive labor systems. These are labor systems that are going to be challenged in later periods by Enlightenment ideas. But at this time, more people getting forced to work. So you have the reason why you have the plantation economies. You have a decrease in the people available to work in the Americas because of the death of Native Americans from disease, at the same time that you have an increase in demand for labor to work on sugar plantations, for example. And the effect is the transatlantic slave trade, other kinds of systems of coercive labor like the encomienda system, and the development of new classification. All right, so let's move on to thinking about one other way that you possibly could have a topic for this time period, and that is comparison. I think let's see. Oh, yes. So just a couple things about comparison, and then it's time for a quiz. So comparison in this time period is the main, one of the main learning objectives. If you are asked about the period 1450 to 1750, you should be prepared to compare all the different states and the different trade routes. One comparison that you might make is that the land-based empires are similar to the maritime empires, and that they are using gunpowder technology that was spread in an earlier time period to build these militaries to expand. One's expanding over land and the other is expanding overseas, but they're both building these really large empires that weren't possible before this age of new technology. And that they engage in the same strategies of rule. Yesterday, BJ had this great slideshow about the architecture, the amazing ways in which both religion and divine right are used to reinforce power. And then these incredible mosques are built, like the Taj Mahal with the Mughals, or the Palace of Versailles with Louis XIV. At the AP Euro exam from Friday, AP Euro took their exam. And one of the questions, it's the second question, the second short answer question, had a passage about divine right. And I was like, our AP World kids can answer that. BJ told them last night, this really is such an important part. If you build a huge, powerful empire, yes, military conquest is important, but also they used religion to reinforce their power. They relied on divine right, And then they projected that power through these huge buildings. If you're going to take a tour of the world, the best places to visit are the empires from this time, because they built some incredible structures. And an important other point, if your differences, are attitudes toward religious diversity. The most intolerant are Spain, the Safavids, and the Tokugawa. And it makes sense. They rely on religious uniformity and view religious diversity as a threat to their power. So the Tokugawa kick out the Portuguese and ban Christianity because they view them as a threat. In the Safavids, they're in battle. They're surrounded on both sides by Sunni caliphates. And in Spain, they use the Inquisition to, like, there's no separation of church and state. If you're loyal to the King of Spain, you are Catholic. If you are not Catholic, you are not loyal, and therefore must be tortured. So again, some other possible topics. You have trade, different African responses. I just reviewed that. And then finally, I want to emphasize two things about culture during this time period. And then we'll move on to the quiz. The first one is the impact of Christianity in the Americas compared to Asia. In the Americas, the Aztecs and the Incans fall. So then you have new states that are able to enforce a degree of conversion. By 1700, all of the Western Hemisphere is pretty much Christian. In Asia, there are Christians, the Europeans, there are Jesuits. There's a Jesuit named Matteo Ricci at the court of the Ming Emperor. But you don't have widespread conversion. And the reason why is you have strong Asian states that are able to push back against these European states, and they're isolationist. So Christianity is there. There are some Christian converts, but it doesn't have as widespread of an impact because you do have the Ming and the Qing and the Tokugawa who push back against the Europeans. And then the last thing for this topic of culture is you have new religions which come about through cultural mixing, through the mixture of different societies interacting. In the case of the Americas, there are new religions like Vodun, which is the majority religion in Saint-Domingue, in which the French colony that becomes Haiti. And it's the majority religion today. And it's a mixture of African spiritual traditions and traditional African religions from West Africa, and then French Catholicism. There's the blending in Saint-Domingue. It's an African diasporic religion. It's a religion that's only possible because of a mixture of enslaved Africans in the colony, in a French colony in the Caribbean at this time period. Similarly, is you have the development of a new religion, Sikhism, which is one of the top 5 most populous religions in the world. It has the most adherents. I think it is like the 5th most adherents in the world. And so Sikhism is a religion that develops in South Asia under the Mughals, but it is not. I saw yesterday there was a question about, is Sikhism a sect of Islam? It's like, no, Sikhism is its own religion. It's not a sect of any other religion, but it blends 2 religious ideas. It blends the monotheism of Islam with the belief system of Hinduism, particularly the ideas of samsara and reincarnation. So you have this blend of some concepts of Hinduism and some concepts of Islam into a new religion. The truth is that the founder of Sikhism said, there is no Islam, there is no Muslim, there is no Hindu, there is only God. So it really is intentionally kind of breaking away from both Islam and Hinduism, and instead creating a new path, a new religion that de-emphasizes ritual. But why is this happening? Because the Mughals are in India and the population is Hindu. Muslim rulers, Hindu population blending leads to a new religion. So that's as these empires expand, they are encountering new populations, and encounters lead to blending. And what's the magic word for blending, cultural blending? Syncretism. All right, well, let's go ahead and transition to a quiz and give your brain some time to process.
Seeing a lot of stuff going on in the chat. You are following along, and we are going to be having a nice break later on, but we want to get through units 4 and 5 first. So thank you, Dr. Pozo. We are going to jump over to Deb, who is going to narrate our upcoming quiz. We have large quizzes. These quizzes are made with the Fiveable Quiz Bank. We'll probably be just doing 10 questions. So keep your eyes focused in on the 10 questions that we share. So if you're going to do this on your phone, get that ready. How are you doing, Deb?
Doing good. Hanging out in the chat. Everyone is like writing some really thoughtful responses. Everyone's really good. Good night.
Great. I'm going to grab my phone and I'm going to take the quiz. And I wish I could just destroy you all if it was a competition with each other, but it's not. Right. I'm going to go over there and put you over there. All right. So everybody grab maybe a phone. If somebody could drop that link into the chat, I'd appreciate it.
I could do it.
I love old people when they try to like use a QR code like it's a new Fandango thing.
Okay, I just put the link in the chat again if anyone needs it. All right, we got 259. Let's keep them going. Come on in. Okay. So 371. Let's get a few more people and then we're going to get started. Keep coming in, you guys. Yeah, I don't know what happened to the music. There we go. Okay. So question 1, which of the following were technical innovations in design? So we got A as all of the above, and then B is the point, flute, C is the caramel, and D is the craft. Let's survive. Okay. Good job, you guys. Okay, the next question in 3, 2, 1. Do the answer. Oh my gosh, great job. That's a big percent. Very impressed with y'all. So all of these options. Okay, next question. The main goal of mercantilism was to ensure the rights and success of mother countries. A. B. Allow free trade and promote economic growth. B. Ensure economic equality between colonies and mother nations. Or D. Promote wealth in colonies. All right. The response is going. Yes, we love the music. All right, let's progress in 3, 2, 1. Woo! Good job. All right. So mercantilism, quick definition, is when the colonies are providing back to the mother country. So my favorite example is you can think of American Revolution with our 13 colonies all going back to England. We took our goods and we shipped them back, and that's a way that the mother countries can make money. All right, great job. Let's head to the next question. What role did European monarchs most frequently play in maritime exploration? Was it building ships, drafting labor, financing voyages, or captaining ships? Yes, in the chat. All right, a bunch of you answers. Let's go on. Nice. That's a good percent. We like to see that. So the European monarchs participated by financing voyages. Those are like the kings. You got your queens. They're clearly very rich and in charge, and so they gave out their money. Great job, you guys. Let's head into the next question. Why did Europeans cross the Atlantic Ocean? Was it to find alternative sailing routes to Asia, to expand the Indian Ocean trade network, to outcompete major Asian players like China in trade, or to conquer the Americas? That's a good question. Also, just want to reiterate something that's been going on in the chat, is that at the bottom of the screen, there's a green box that contains slides, replays, and a review packet all in the Cram Hub. And feel free to click that right after this for a while and make sure you're following along. All right, I think you're ready for the next question. Nice job, you guys. Very proud. And it was to find alternative sailing routes to Asia. Remember, most people in Europe didn't even know that Americas existed at that time. So that's why people used to say that Columbus discovered America, right? He didn't really discover it, but he was kind of the first person to like bring it to the European world. All right, I think we're ready for the next one. And this is one of my favorite topics, the Columbian Exchange. The Columbian Exchange can best be described as A, a local trade of animal and plant life, a cross-cultural exchange of biological goods, C is an international exchange of technology, and D is a regional exchange of religious beliefs. All right, good job. We got a bunch of people who answered. Let's see. Amazing, you guys. 89%. And yes, this was across cultures of biological goods. So you got your food, you got the diseases, you got your animals, right? And it was across a really, really large area. And now we can go on to the next question. What slave trade resulted from that Columbian Exchange? Was it the Indian slave trade, was it the Pacific slave trade, the Arctic slave trade, or the Atlantic slave trade? Think of all the regions and then think of where Columbian Exchange was around the world. Pieces brains. And let's see the answer. Nice! 97% of you. I'm so proud. Good job, Atlantic. Okay. 7. In which labor system did people become property according to law? Was it indentured servitude, chattel slavery, hacienda system, or traditional African slavery? Wow, I see you in the chat with all the peppers. What a vibe. Just answer the questions too. All right, we got a bunch of you coming up. Good job, good job. Going. And let's see the answer. Nice. Okay, so this goes over the different types. So I'll briefly go over each one. So indentured servitude, that one is if you're in debt, if you owe something, right? You're gonna work for a set amount of years in order to pay it back. Chattel slavery, that's people as property. That's, you might think of just slavery or like old kind of slavery, right? And like what you'd imagine it to be. Hacienda was an economic system in Americas, South America, which we went over before. And then traditional African slavery was within Africa about fighting. All right, let's progress to the next question and see what you know. How did Tokugawa Japan respond to European-dominated long-distance trade? Was it restricted trade with Europeans, banned all trade with Europeans, open their ports to all traders, or become completely isolationist? Let's see. Okay, I see you guys in the chat going. Okay, let's see what the answer is. Okay, so this one might be something to go over. So Tokugawa Japan restricted their trade with Europe. So it wasn't like exactly here where they became completely isolationist. This is really restricted, right? They started to become more ethnocentric. And yeah, okay.
Good job, Deb. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. We're just going to stick to those 8 questions. I thought that was a great job. I'm going to jump in and chime in about this question. which is true? Restricted trade with Europeans became completely isolationist. At the end of the day, AP won't use overly blasé phrases like completely, because that would be 100%. And we don't do that in history because there's always the anomaly, there's always the outlier. All right. So we're going to jump right back into our slideshow and head to Unit 5. I will go ahead and share that. Did you get a cup of coffee or take a break for a second, Amy? I got my cup. There you go. All right, wonderful.
I have the sparkling water. All right, we are now, oh, congratulations. You made it to 1750. We had night 1, 1200 to 1450. And then we just covered 1450 to 1750, Unit 3 last night for the land-based empires. And then Unit 4 with the maritime empires, transoceanic interconnections from 1450 to 1750. So now we're officially in period 3, 1750 to 1900. I was told I was getting a little bit too into the weeds with the last couple of slides on comparison and causation. These slides are part of the slideshow, so I'll probably skip those and focus just on following the questions and answering the fundamentals of the curriculum. And then we can circle back to some comparison and causation and continuity and change over time, some of those deeper like historical thinking skills. We can do more of that on the last night after we just looked at some of these basic ideas and gotten through the majority of the curriculum. So yeah, sorry about that. I really like comparing Baudin to Sikhism, but maybe that's something, those are the kinds of things we can do on the last night. We actually have some really fun games planned, so come back the night before the exam. There's some really interesting activities. All right, so now we're on Unit 5, which is revolutions. Unit 5 starts off with the Enlightenment. So when you are writing your essays, you see anything about rights, you should write about the Enlightenment, because the concept of rights, the idea that there are individual rights, that human beings, just by the nature of being human, by being born, that they have rights, comes from the Enlightenment. The APUSH DBQ used rights. The AP Euro DBQ had questions, or like, I think, yeah, it was on one of them was on the Haitian Revolution and the Enlightenment. So rights originates with the Enlightenment, the concept of rights, and it's a big part of world history. After the Enlightenment, this concept is applied to more and more groups. So what is the Enlightenment? The Enlightenment is a late 17th to 18th century intellectual movement with a focus on reasoning. The idea is that instead of truth being revealed through some sort of divine text, truth can be understood through observation of the natural world and through reasoning. So this focus on reason is then applied to human affairs. And in fact, if there's one person, the only Enlightenment thinker you can remember, it is this man on the screen, John Locke. So John Locke comes up in 1689. He writes this 2 treatises of civil government in which he comes up with this idea of natural rights. And we're going to talk a little bit about the idea of natural rights. But for the consequences of the Enlightenment, I would like you guys to write down inspired social reform movements and political revolutions. Because all of the social reform movements after 1750 and the political revolutions, including America, are going to be inspired and use John Locke or use the concept of natural rights as a launching point for their activities. So social reform movements and political revolution. All right, so it says here, both natural rights and social contract encourage what action in the United States? That, of course, is going to be the American Revolution, which BJ is going to talk about in just a second. For the next slide, natural rights is tied into individualism. The idea that you as an individual have natural rights. John Locke identified 3 in particular. these three natural rights. What could they possibly be? Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, right? So the idea is that if the government doesn't guarantee these natural rights, in fact, if the government violates these natural rights of life, liberty, and property, as John Locke said, and then Thomas Jefferson changed it to the pursuit of happiness. If the government violates these natural rights, then it has violated the social contract and can be overthrown. The other important concept that comes out of the Enlightenment, because BJ is going to talk about in a little bit the social contract and the American Revolution, is deism. Deism is this idea of, it decreases the importance of religion. It is this idea that there is a creator God, but that God does not intervene in personal human affairs and have perform miracles. It is an impersonal God, and it's very much connected to the idea of human beings have brains and their job is to reason. All right, so let's go ahead and look at the actual application of these ideas in some revolutions, and I'll turn it over. Will I? Yes, I think so.
So we're going to continue here with the Enlightenment ideas inspire movements. And we have to acknowledge the fact that a lot of the changes that are occurring in the world still today have a root in a movement, a philosophical movement about humans' potential to change. So I'm going to just throw this out. When we were in Unit 1, 2, this is before the Reformation, before the Renaissance, before the Enlightenment, before the scientific revolution, we were always entrenched in this we don't control thing, God controls thing, the church controls things. And not here to say that's not true, but I want to acknowledge that the Enlightenment wants to state there may be a God, there might be a belief system, deism, but we humans do have the potential for change. So we can enslave people, but we can then look for the justification to end slavery. We can keep women out, patriarchal society, but we can also reason on why to bring women in. So this is going to be the era that we're going to see the foundations to the end of serfdom, slavery, the rise of feminism, and the suffrage movement that occurs for younger people, for people that don't have land, and of course, for women and minorities. Now, the Enlightenment is, what is that, 5.1. As soon as we are done 5.1, we dive into a bunch of examples of political revolutions, often nicknamed the Atlantic revolutions. So I'm going to start off just with the American Revolution. However, I think the French, Haitian, and the Bolivar revolutions matter as much. So in terms of the American Revolution, I could be a little bit opinionated on this because it is revolutionary for people to say that a government doesn't have a certain right or mandate to control. That we hold these truths to be self-evident, that we are created equal, we have rights, and these are human rights at birth. That these natural rights are life, liberty, and it sounds prettier, pursuit of happiness. But hold on. The American Revolution is also a war for independence. It can also be considered an elite class wanting to break away to be an elite class. So I'm going to sit there and say, is the American Revolution truly revolutionary? Slow it down before you sound like I'm bashing America. And let's remember the Constitution. After America fights for its independence and it has its Articles of Confederation, it struggles. And then it creates what you and I, if you're especially an American, are going to say the Constitution of the United States. That to me is revolutionary. So the articles, when you break them down, the Bill of Rights, the ability to amend, the ability to adapt, to bob and a weave. For example, I believe the French right now are on their 5th constitution since the French Revolution. We are on her first constitution. Has it changed? Yes. That is revolutionary. It is Enlightenment based, that humans in 1700s, 1800s, and still today have the right to evolve as a society. So I'm just saying, let's not forget about the Constitution. Another document, here we go, the French. Now, the French have a more social revolution. So theirs is based off of ours. Marquis de Lafayette helped write with Thomas Jefferson what you're reading up on the screen right now. Men are born and remain free and equal in rights. Social distinctions may be based only upon general usefulness. What you're going to see in the French Revolution is an attempt to destroy class structures that doesn't happen in the United States. Now, as ideal as that sounds, blowing up class structures, it also leads to them eating their own. Many of the revolutionaries in the French Revolution are killed by the French Revolution. My favorite example is Robespierre. So the end of the French Revolution is an acknowledgement that maybe Europe needs to change, but it also ends with a complete despot, Napoleon. So here it is. I'm giving you that these are Enlightenment-based revolutions that sometimes struggle to get out of the gates well. Now, the Haitian Revolution, as you see up on the screen, assure forever an empire of liberty in this country, our birthplace. We must take away from this inhumane government, which held for so long our spirits in the most humiliating torpor. All hope to resubjugate us. We must at last live independent or die. All right. The Haitian Revolution is connected. They are a French colony. They are near the United States. So they're going to be influenced by both the French and American revolutions. They're also going to be influenced by the fact that there is general tension going on between France and Spain for colonies. So in all of this, the Haitians rise up. One of the earlier leaders, Toussaint Louverture, helped fight the French for what would be independence. Now, the independence movement of Haiti will lead to an independent state, largely on the back of slaves and slave descendants in Haiti. So it really is an asterisk mark compared to the other revolutions. Sadly, the Haitian Revolution struggles in its first decades and even still today to create a consistent, stable society. It is still very commodity-based, agriculturally based, and not that it hasn't worked. I actually have taught a Haitian student, but the Enlightenment ideals gain its independence, but the elite class still are the elite in Haiti afterwards. The Latin American revolutions, we are going to have one of my favorite documents. This is an excerpt of the Jamaica letter. Simón Bolívar was a revolutionary in Latin America who gets kicked out of Latin America in the sense and he goes to Jamaica. He's living in exile. While living in exile and wanting change for Venezuela and the rest of Gran Colombia, he writes the following. In short, Americans by birth, we derive our rights from Europe, and we have to assert these rights. That really ruined my drama there. We have to assert these rights against the rights of the natives, and at the same time, we must defend ourselves against the invaders. I'm going to take a sip. Dr. Amy commented earlier about class structures. Simón Bolívar is a Creole. He is of Spanish descent, born in America. And because he's Spanish descent, he is upper class. But because he's born in America, he will never be a peninsulare. He will never lead. He'll never own. He'll never control the fate of his people. So in his Jamaica letter, he talks about Americans by birth, we derive our rights from Europe. He is right. However, look at the second part. We have to assert these rights against the rights of the natives. So he's now stating something that is not beautiful at all, is that we as Creoles are higher class than the natives and maybe even the mixed race mestizos below us, that we have a unique burden on our back to break free from Spanish rule, but create an elite class here in the Americas. That's why that Costa art mentioned earlier, the Costa system matters so much, because Latin America, independent of Spanish rule after Bolivar, has a very mixed dynamic class structure. When you look up to the United States, it's largely European descendants who will now rule. When you look southerner, it's going to be more mixed race. Thank you for those who are supporting me, especially when I'm dropping in vocab that needs a definition. So in all of the different revolutions that we brought up, I do want to give a shout out to this term. It's called social contract. It's an implicit agreement among the members of society to cooperate for the social benefits by sacrificing some individual freedom for state protection and benefits. Meaning, in short, you give up some of those inalienable natural rights to the government, so the government now takes care of you. My favorite example is, well, this doesn't make sense in, the 1700s, but my favorite example is the speed limit. The government gives you roads, you're welcome, and the government then has the right to tell you what speed to drive on those roads. The social contract is what America, French, Haiti, and the Latin American nations are going to apply as they form new parliamentary constitutional governments, some having dictators over time at times, but overall abiding by this Enlightenment ideal. I do have the need for speed. All right, now, I enjoy where we just were. Now, besides those revolutions, there's other words I think we need to know that are associated. Let's pause. You do not need to know every last detail, general or president, emerging during the American, for example, or the French, for example, revolutions. Have a big understanding of how it's connected to the Enlightenment, be able to read some documents, maybe look at a feminist document that could be included, a Haitian document. Stop worrying about all the little details. They don't appear on the AP test, all right? Trust me. If they did, I would lecture a lot, and I do not lecture. Okay, what I'm doing tonight is not what I do in my classroom. Now, I do want to bring up four words today that are associated with this era. So, nationalism, liberalism, capitalism, and socialism. These words emerged because of the how do I want to say? Because we've realized we have a right to change ourselves. So here's my simplified definitions. Nationalism is pride in one's nation. I think you all know that. And yeah, I'm getting a little annoyed. I know how to spell my name. But let's focus back in. The other term I love about nationalism is the desire to rule oneself. Everybody looks at nationalism as waving the big red, white, and blue. But my favorite version of nationalism is that we as Americans have the right to do what we feel is best for us. Thus, nationalism could see itself in Germany. People that speak German, eat German, dance German, they might say, then we should have a German nation. Hey, I'm Italian. We should have an Italian nation. Sometimes we're going to see that nationalism builds people together in America, in Germany, and Italy. But don't forget, nationalism also leads to World War II. Nationalism leads to some genocides in the fall of Yugoslavia. So nationalism is not always a beautiful thing. Next word, liberalism. Slow it down here. Liberalism today, when we look at like politics, liberalism is this belief in big government, but that is not the liberalism of the 1800s. Liberalism in the 1800s is this belief in like civil rights and openness and constitutional government or negotiations and contracts. Liberalism is the fact that you have rights and so do others. This even includes trade, openness in trade. Like liberalized trade would be openness in trade, less tariffs and less taxes. Capitalism. Everybody thinks 1776 is a big deal because of the Declaration of Independence. Hold on. Don't also forget that Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations is also produced that year. It's when the book is written and it's out for sale. And all of a sudden, free market economics is explained clearly. This is that laissez-faire mentality, this idea that the government should not play an active role in controlling the economy. So, mercantilism, I'm backing up a bit, is this belief that the government should openly support joint stock companies and should use its bullion to go and create colonies. Mercantilism is not capitalism. Capitalism says private corporations should compete with each other to explore, to create, to hire. Okay? If there's going to be an emergence of this open economy capitalism, what happens if that doesn't work for you? Thus, a closed command economy in what we call socialism. Capitalism leads to socialism. I don't know if that makes sense, but I think it does. If in a capitalist society you have 20%, maybe 30% that struggle to make it, then they're going to look to people like Karl Marx for a dramatic change in events. So that's where we have the Communist Manifesto and socialism. This era of the 1800s is going to be complex because we have granted through the Enlightenment the right to change. That means we also have the right to debate. And I would hope that you as AP World students now understand capitalism, pros and cons, but now rationally understand why socialism emerges. The horrors, the chaos going on in some of the urban cities of Europe explain with evidence the failures of capitalism for a political society and entity. That was a lot of words. All right, so I'm going to pass this over to Dr. Posa, who's going to now dive into another revolution, the Industrial Revolution.
All right. At the end of this unit, we're going to take a 5-minute breather where we're going to put up a clock and everybody can like walk away from their computer and take a sip of water and stretch or do something that's not requiring you staring at a screen. I'm just going to go through quickly industrialization. That is the main part of Unit 5. But after the Enlightenment, social reform movements, and the political revolutions, then the rest of Unit 5 really talks about industrialization and responses to industrialization. I feel like this is a little bit easier for students to understand for the most part. So what caused industrialization? There are several different causes to industrialization. But I think the first thing you should think of is geography. Coal and colonies. Great Britain has the access to coal right next to navigable rivers. There are other things that are important for causing industrialization, like the protection of private property, the movement of people to cities, and the accumulation of capital, which allows people to invest in factories. But I think the first thing you should think of is geography. Great Britain also, which is the first industrial revolution, this is sometimes referred to as the Great Divergence because Great Britain is the first to industrialize. They get a head start. And the reason why they're the first is they also start building canals. They have access to waterways, and that in addition to having all of that land that they can outsource raw materials to or outsource raw materials from, then they're able to get a head start. And that's where the first industrial revolution happens, is in Great Britain. So the second question here is about Japan's response to increased industrialization as compared to China. Before we jump into the Meiji Restoration and China's industrialization, I think we should maybe take a 5-minute break because that is some pretty dense material. And what do you think, BJ? Or do you want to finish out the unit 5?
I see people are getting a little tired. I think that if we could truck through Unit 5 and then give them the break, that we promised them that break in about 5 or 6 minutes, I think they'd be appreciated. So why don't we truck through a little bit more and then they'll have that break.
All right, let's do it. All right, so let's move into the next part of industrialization. There was an LEQ on the difference between the first industrial revolution and the second industrial revolution. I think it was an LEQ on one of either the APUSH or the AP Euro exam. And it's also in the world history curriculum. After the first industrial revolution, which happens in Great Britain, it spreads to the rest of Western Europe. And then the winners of industrialization by the time you get to 1900 are the United States and Japan specifically. Russia also is going to try to industrialize, but if you're going to look at who is most successful by 1900, the #1 exporters of steel in the world, which is a good marker of who has successfully industrialized, are the United States and Japan. That's the spread to US and Japan. And I think that the Meiji Restoration comes about a little bit later. Sorry, the packet was created a little bit different than the slides. So let's move to the differences between the first and second industrial revolution, which is question number 17. And then we'll circle back to looking at Meiji Japan a little bit later. So the fossil fuel revolution really refers to the extraction of materials like coal and then later oil in order as like a source of energy. That leads to, that's really important for like the theme of interaction with the environment, that you have coal and natural gas and oil that are going to be the sources of energy in order to fuel these new machines. The 3 industries between the first industrial revolution and the second industrial revolution, or sorry, the key difference, I like to use the acronym SIT and SEC. So SIT, S-I-T, for the first industrial revolution is steam, iron, and textiles. Those are the new industries that are created in the first industrial revolution. And then the second industrial revolution is SEC, S-E-C, which is steel, electricity, and chemicals. You can also add in there interchangeable parts because that becomes important for industrialization as well. So industrialization is going to be important for a lot of different ways, but these new technologies lead to the creation of new industries, which lead to machines mass producing goods in a way that completely changes the global economy. No longer is the global share of manufacturing in Asia. Now it is going to be concentrated in countries that have successfully industrialized, which are going to be in Western Europe, the United States, and in Japan. Another key difference then in the first and second industrial revolution is that the second industrial revolution happens in, the winners of that are in the United States and Japan. So you can also talk about the geographic differences or the regions changing. New technologies are really important, have important consequences. You know, always think about causes and consequences whenever you're doing something in world history. So the consequences of industrialization are Unit 6, like literally Unit 6 is titled Consequences of Industrialization, which is really going to include imperialism and migration. But the technologies are the how. So how these countries, your industrialized countries, are going to like be able to go forth and take new territory that they hadn't previously taken before, like in the interior of Africa and in parts of Asia, is through new technologies that allow them to explore and communicate and manage these territories. You have, like pictured here, steamships and the telegraph and railroads that allow for the movement of goods, the movement of people, and the management of big empires that are going to be really important for new imperialism, which is in Unit 6. All right, so these reform movements, I think BJ is going to talk about.
Yeah, this one's a hard one, and for us to sit there and say we can do justice to this would be kind of laughable. So let's acknowledge that Europe had the lead when it came to the Industrial Revolution. Good. All right, we agree. But that's not going to be on the AP test. What's going to be on the AP? Why would that go? Where is that going? Get bigger. What's going to happen on the AP test is they're going to ask about how the rest of the world responded. So I'm going to go over very briefly. Japan was a feudal society under the Tokugawa. That means the richest landowner with the most power, the shogun, called the shots. People lived on other people's land. Peasants lived on the land of the daimyo, stuff from yesterday. And what happened was an internal struggle occurred and a decision was made, sometimes violently, to restore the emperor to a stronger, more formal role. That is the Meiji, Emperor Meiji restoration, restoring the emperor to the lead of Japan. Why does that matter? Instead of competing feudal societies, we speak as one. Like the United States has a president, how Great Britain has a prime minister and a parliament, speaks as one. Now Meiji Restoration has an emperor speaking as one. And instead of having these, I guess you'd just say the samurai fighting on behalf of the daimyos, we now have a bureaucracy. And the daimyo become leaders in that bureaucracy. The ronin, they become like, they actually take off the samurai uniform, stuff, and they put on suits. And they're westernizing their economy and industry, and they're starting to become sort of imperialistic. So now it's time to open up our country for the benefit of Japan. And sadly, that will have some negative ramifications in World War II. Meiji Restoration. The Japanese choose a path to be more unified, and it is successful for Japan to do that. Sadly, World War II. So we got to remember that, but that's going to be in Unit 7, 8, and 9. Now, how did the Ottomans do? Well, the Ottomans are going to be nicknamed the sick man of Europe, so we know it doesn't go well. They have a reform movement for about 50 years called the Tanzimat reforms. This is when they, in the Ottoman Empire, fought hard with their sultan to attempt to have a constitutional monarchy. They wanted to have roads built by the government. They wanted to have limits to power. They wanted to have more freedom to the people. And this westernized constitutional government sounds very European. The problem with the Tanzimat reforms is that it was canceled by its own sultan. So the Tanzimat reforms, in my opinion, in the short term, were a failure. In the long term, it gives birth to a reformed-minded Turkish community called the Young Turks that will create the Republic of Turkey after World War I. Had that not happened, what had happened to the Middle East after World War I may not have led to what, the Republic of Turkey and such later on. So I'm going to give a smile to the Meiji Restoration, kind of a side thumb to the Tanzimat reforms. Yep, Gina got Ataturk. Awesome. Very good. The self-strengthening movement is probably the least likely to be on the test. The self-strengthening movement is when the Chinese tried to do very similar things. Western-style economy with a Western-style military, with a Western-style bureaucracy. Problem is, the self-strengthening movement created in the ashes of internal civil war failed because China had such an entrenched tradition of the civil service exams and the scholar gentry and the family of the monarchs. It was so entrenched that the self-strengthening movement did not go far enough and break down the Chinese government and tradition. So the self-strengthening movement will kind of implode on itself. Not connected to it will be the Boxer Rebellion. And the self-strengthening movement, if it was effective, they would not have had an internal rebellion, the Boxer Rebellion at the end of the 1800s. But it shows that the Chinese were not successful in reforming themselves. The last one, which obviously Russia gets a limited play in AP World when I love it. A lot of us love it that teach it. The Russians will have a reform-minded movement. They will end serfdom. They will create a Trans-Siberian Railroad in the name of industrialization. They will create a parliament called a Duma. All of this fails. It fails because what had happened is that was funny that played that. What happened is Russia had such inequitable development that there was such a large both peasant class and urban poor class that by World War I, actually 1905 up to World War I, was going to be the seed of socialist upbringing. They wanted revolution in government, maybe even a bloody revolution. And World War I will lead to that because of their failures in World War I, which we address later tonight. So we have 4 reformed movements. If I had to study any of these, I would go study Meiji and Tanzimat, read more about those. Gonna pass it to Amy, and I think Amy's feeling good to probably lead us into that 5-minute break.
Okay, so that is the only thing I want to say actually is the Ottoman Tanzimat and the Qing self-strengthening movement are very similar. They have conservative monarchs. So the Tanzimat and the self-strengthening are reform movements resisted by conservative forces. The name of the monarch for the Qing Empire, for the Manchu Empire, synonymous with the Qing dynasty, is the Empress Dowager Cixi, Cixi. And the Ottomans is Sultan Abdul Hamid II. You should totally throw those into your DBQs. These are two monarchs that don't want to change. They resist change. They want to stay in power. So if you're asked the question, yes, the Ottomans failed to industrialize. That proves fatal. Yes, the Qing failed to industrialize. That proves fatal. Why? They had conservative rulers. You know who was a conservative? The Meiji Emperor in Japan. They went all in on industrialization and they were a success. The Ottomans and the Qing, they resisted, and then it was too little too late, and they fell. So that's really pretty much the simple story of all of that information, is that the Ottomans and the Qing resisted, and then Meiji Empire, the Meiji Emperor went all in, and they were successful and became their own empire that went out after industrialization and conquered new territories. All right, I think that wraps it up for Unit 5. What do you think, BJ? We took them through a lot.
Yes.
So let's go ahead and take a break. I think that we have a 5-minute timer.
What we're going to do, everybody, is we're going to take a true 5-minute break where we're not going to be monitoring the chat, and we welcome you to get off the chat. Take a break, walk around the house, go get a snack. I'm probably going to go get some Swiss rolls and another cup of coffee. So you'll see on the screen, I'm just going to post a very simple Google timer. Hopefully that will come through. And I'm just going to go ahead and press play, and I'll see you in 5 minutes. Stop. Stop. Done. So I know it's really important, but I did not choose to go with Swiss rolls. I went with zebra cakes. I didn't create a poll, but we can give our reactions, our thoughts about zebra cakes. They're like hexagonal and they're white with a black stripe. Zebra cakes. So got my last cup of coffee. So I think I'm ready to go. You've never heard of them, Madison? Just Google them. I don't care about Googling anything else. Just Google zebra cakes. I don't even want to know what GMOs, Green Revolution, what GMOs are in them, but it's worth it sometimes just to get through. Now, why did I choose zebra cakes? Is I chose zebra cakes because they're white, and I didn't want to get the dark of the Swiss roll in my teeth and then be judged by you. I think this is all very rational thinking that I go through as a 47-year-old man. Now, I think it's time to get back to our fun. Dr. Posa, do we want to do a Unit 5 quiz? Or actually, I could ask the crowd. Do you guys want to do a Unit 5 quiz or do you want to jump into Unit 6? So quiz or no quiz? Yes, quiz. Oh, nice. All right, so I'm going to go backstage. All right, so we're going to be playing a Unit 5 quiz here. Hopefully this link works. And here we go. So it should be up on the screen. Go on.
Okay, we're getting started. So we're looking at what the Western European Enlightenment most emphasized. Y'all are so cute in the chat. Yes, and that is a lot of what those Enlightenment thinkers were kind of looking at, was prioritizing reason rather than the kind of like more religious structures that we were kind of looking at before. But yeah. Well, which of the philosophers invented the idea of a social contract between the people and the government? This was a really big idea at the time, and these are all kind of those Enlightenment thinkers really want to be looking at. Sorry, I was definitely not unmuted. Okay, you guys did great on this one. Good job. So which of the following revolutions did not lead to the creation of a new nation state? So think of what separated a lot of these different revolutions from each other. Okay, BJ covered this in his lecture, so make sure you're listening. There we go. Okay, so you guys remember from BJ's lecture. Okay, this one's a bit of a detailed question, so don't worry too much if you get this one wrong. Again, don't stress too much with this one. Okay, so this is kind of looking at what caused the industrialization to happen, and yeah, just like where that shift kind of came from. Yeah, so that's kind of looking at shifting from the dispersed, like specified labor into cities, and a lot of people were really working factories at the time. Okay, so we're thinking energy sources for this one. Yep, great job. Yes, so remember in the Meiji Restoration, the government was really pushing for industrialization, whereas in Britain it was mainly like companies and things like that. Again, back to the Meiji Restoration. You see one of your guys' favorites. Yeah, so Japan was kind of trying to also mainly protect their power as a nation on the global stage. But yeah. Now, these are all really important inventions, but think of what would be the most impactful. Yes, exactly. The steam engine changed a lot, especially in factories and in terms of transportation, a lot of those types of ideas.
Wow. Sorry, I had a tech issue there. Angela, thank you very much for leading everybody through some of those questions that you put together. We really appreciate it. We are now going to jump back into our slideshow. We have a desire to get into Unit 6, I'm pretty sure, and away we go. So I'm going to pop up the slideshow for Dr. Posa to do a couple slides, and excited.
Good job, everyone. Bye.
Thank you, Angela. Really appreciate that. You'll notice that on the packet, we only have, I think, like 8 or 9 questions related to Unit 6, the consequences of industrialization, because there's 2 main consequences to industrialization, and that is imperialism and migration. Those are the 2 things that we'll be talking about in Unit 6. Last year's GBQ was on the new imperialism and its economic impact in Africa and Asia. Maybe your teacher made you write that one. I don't know, but yeah, it's a good DBQ if you want to practice it. It's online on the College Board website released. So one thing I always want to emphasize is that you have to know the who, what, when, where, why. It is important to know, like, what specifically are you talking about when you talk about the new imperialism. So the who is the United States, Western Europe, and Japan. But you can really just say, like, any industrialized nation, a successfully industrialized nation is going to go out and want markets and materials. Those are the M&Ms. Seeking markets and materials, these newly industrialized states go forth and conquer new territory. The territory that they're going to conquer, remember in Unit 5, they lost the Western Hemisphere. The Western Hemisphere is broken away. They are free. America, Haiti, Bolivar, all of Latin America. So they focus in on parts of Africa and Asia that were not colonized. In particular, new imperialism is going to focus on the interior of Africa with the Berlin Conference and the division of Africa in, using steamships to go into the interior of Africa with new medicine that allows them to, like quinine, that allows them to resist malaria, and then also into parts of Asia that they hadn't conquered. So this is the time period of where the Mughals are going to fall after the Indian Revolt of 1857. So new imperialism is expansion into the interior of Africa and Asia, which previously had not been conquered. Not all of Asia, but parts of Asia. The when is the late 19th century up until World War I. World War I is seen as the height of the new imperialism. And the why are the M&Ms, markets and materials. And the how is all of that new tech. So know the definition of new imperialism and how it compares to the old imperialism, which is the question in your packet, is that the old imperialism are these empires that are trying to control trade routes because of mercantilism. They're trying to control these, get more colonies because the colonies physically and then the trade routes themselves are what generates their wealth. But now you have new industrialized countries that are looking for raw materials to fuel their factories, like literally fuel, and the raw materials that can be used to produce manufactured goods that can then be sold for export. So newly industrialized countries looking for markets and materials versus the old imperialism of these mercantilist economies trying to control trade routes. in terms of how they justify conquering these territories, they use social Darwinism, which is a really important concept. That's one of the, I think number 26 in your packet is how was social Darwinism utilized? And the answer is this idea of hierarchy being natural, with the people at the top being the Europeans. So drawing on the ideas of scientific racism, there is this, it's actually, social Darwinism actually isn't Darwin. It wasn't Charles Darwin who came up with it. It was actually an Englishman named Herbert Spencer who comes up with this idea of scientific hierarchies in which whoever's at the bottom is just naturally supposed to be there. So the way that they justify conquest of these areas and the subjugation of these people is through the idea of science, through the idea of this is just the natural order of things. And it relies on racism. It relies on the subjugation of people. So there's a blending between the scientific racism of the time and the ideology of social Darwinism. Some of you guys have also heard of white man's burden. All right.
So what we're going to do is we're going to take it to the next step. We're going to go back to this slide. Ideologies of imperialism. These are the ways people justify and explain themselves. So let's look at documents because that is what we do as AP World people. We look at documents. Now, this one's going to be hard. You're going to have to really zoom in on it. This is actually AP US as well. This is Reverend Josiah Strong, and he's telling a congregation audience of why we need to spread our wings and go abroad and how it's justified. And if you really, really get down to it, we have people in the Americas and Europe feeling they have a right to go abroad, but then they have to tell their people that they're not doing it to kill. They're not doing it for land. They're not doing it for money. So they start justifying it, often with religion. So it seems to me that God, with infinite wisdom and skill, is training the Anglo-Saxon English race for an hour sure to come in the world's future. Heretofore, there has always been in the history of the world a comparatively unoccupied land westward, into which the crowded countries of the East have poured their surplus population. So what you'll see in this, he's justifying the Anglo-Saxonism as a reason to go. It's ethnic, it's nationalistic, it is religious, Reverend. And now that same concept here is in the annexation of Philippines. So we have a president of the United States. This is William McKinley, having to justify armed conflict in taking the Philippines. So I'm going to let you read this document and use the chat. So I'm going to step back and you're going to step forward. I'm going to ask you to identify in your own words one reason President McKinley gives in justifying the annexation of the Philippines, which will go all the way to 1903. Some of your teachers might use the term hip or happy with you when talking about document analysis. This is a great document to break down. Now, President McKinley was way dead by 1903. But when the United States, this is a historical situation. When the United States entered conflict in Cuba in the Spanish-American War, It did this in an effort to help the Cubans in, Cuba. But now part of that was that the Spanish fleet was in Manila Bay in the Philippines, which is very close to China. So now everything is thrown out. Don't worry about the Philippines. Don't worry about Cuba. Worry about China. Motivation. The historical situation is the United States wanted to increase its trade with East Asia. That is Japan. That is China. Good. The intended audience of this document is basically Congress. If you remember the United States Constitution, Congress votes. They vote for war. He sends the troops and manages the troops. So I believe that he is trying to persuade them, trying to not sell the United States as an occupying people, but rather as an uplifting, supportive, loving, paternalistic, that means fatherly, paternalistic society trying to take care of the younglings of the Philippines. So what I really want to make sure is when you view these documents on the AP exam, you look through the document. Too often students just want to read the document and take it at face value. But what is going on at the time? To whom is the person speaking? To what does the objective of this person? And that is access to wealth in East Asia. Great document. Horrible document, but also great at the same time. Now, I'm going to have to sadly abbreviate the context here. In imperialism, there are dynamic causes and effects. And these are global. We understand how the Industrial Revolution leads to Europe's ability to expand. And we also understand how Europe justifies this expansion. What I have are 4 visuals. Yeah, you should be offended, not as a Filipino, but maybe even as an American. That's why we study world history, is to understand the right and wrong choices we did. So in this document, we see the Berlin Conference is at the top left corner. The Berlin Conference was called by Otto von Bismarck, who, as the chancellor of in a united and new Germany, wanted to bring European states together to negotiate the fate of Africa. They wanted access to African, potential. And the only way for Germany, this new nation, to gain any of that was through negotiation. So you'll see here is Otto von Bismarck cutting up a cake that states Africa. Now, sometimes your teachers might call this the race for Africa. We will look at how Africa responds, but what I want to focus on is how through negotiation, Otto von Bismarck thought a future could be held where everybody gets a little piece of Africa. Now, this will lead to World War I, because even through trade of African states, there's still going to be competition and unrest. Below him is an effect of the Berlin Conference. A guy by the name of Cecil Rhodes will be able to access the power of South Africa. So let me give you a little bit about him. There were Boers, for those who were asking earlier, there were Boers or Dutch descendants. Boer means farmer. There was these Boers or Dutch descendants who had taken over bits and pieces of South Africa, a region and now a country. The British came in and through the support of Cecil Rhodes, tried their hardest to fight the Boers and the native South Africans. One very powerful tribe were the Zulu. So we have the Zulu uprisings, we have the Boer Wars 1 and 2. Cecil Rhodes masterminded a lot of that. He also is very famous for helping create a new corporation. For extra credit on the AP exam, does anybody know what corporation or company Cecil Rhodes helped create in South Africa? De Beers is correct. Good job, Taven. De Beers is where, first of all, I probably got my wife's diamond on her ring. Thanks, Melissa. But De Beers was a mining company that thrived in South Africa, and Cecil Rhodes wanted the British to be so powerful, if you look at that image there, that they would be able to build a telegraph, if not a railroad line from Egypt in the north all the way down to South Africa. So Cecil Rhodes, very infamous visual of him there. That is him being the Colossus of Rhodes, trying to conquer in a transcontinental way all of Africa. There is no extra credit. Thank you, Alexis. Now, how did some states respond to this emerging tensions with Europeans? Well, over in China, the Chinese, who did see an influx of opium coming in, fought back. They fought back in what you and I would refer to as the Opium Wars in the almost mid 1800s. Yes, there was illegal opium trade by many British merchants who were making and buying the opium in Afghanistan and India, that region of South Asia, and then selling it illegally in China. When the Chinese didn't like this and couldn't get it to stop, they had their own little opium tea party, meaning they literally threw opium overboard. The difference is when you have a tea party, that's some money. When you have the opium party, that's a lot of money going over. So the British over respond in what we call the Opium Wars. A series of wars completely one-sided will be fought. The Industrial Revolution has led to the British military dramatically outpacing the Chinese military. The Chinese would take their boats called junks and set them afire and throw them, into the metal ships of the British. So it was one-sided, and out of that will come things like the Treaty of Nanking. The Treaty of Nanjing, or King, depending on how your teacher might teach it, was an unequal treaty giving up like Hong Kong to the British. So if you've ever wondered, why do so many people in Hong Kong speak such fluent English? That is because until I think 1997, Hong Kong was a territory of the British from the Opium Wars. So the British and the Chinese fought. The Chinese tried to fight back, but they failed. It's a little bit different, but maybe more same in India. In something that's called the Sepoy Mutiny or the Indian Rebellion, you will see that the Indians tried to fight back against the British East India Company that was dominating the South Asian plateau. Right? There was just this region of South Asia that was being controlled by the merchant British East India Tea Company. So they fought back. Now, sepoys were hired Indians who served in the British military. They rebelled. There's more to the story that I'm giving to you right now, but so there was a fight. But the British East India Tea Company, with the support of the English crown, Queen Victoria, squashed the Sepoy Mutiny. Here's a difference. The Opium Wars will lead to China being a sphere of influence, very influenced by different powers. The Sepoy Mutiny will literally lead to the British taking over India as a formal colony. So I wanted you guys to see a lot of these little vignettes, little stories going on in this era of imperialism. Again, any of the white terms on this page are the type of white terms you want to Google later on. By the way, when you've heard of Opium Wars, there is a first and there is a second and all. It don't matter. just broad. Like I like to tell my kids, imagine looking at world history from up here, big picture, where you're looking all over the world. Don't zoom in on like how tall was President George Washington. And yes, we are still in Unit 6. I'm going to pass it over to my friend Amy.
All right. So the last couple of questions we have here. You have different types of state expansion, and this is not on your packet, but just know that like separate from the imperialism we've been talking about in terms of Europe going into the interior of Africa and conquering different parts of Asia, there is also overland expansion that's happening at the same time in the United States and in Russia. I think that's on the slide there. That was just on the screen. Manifest Destiny. Yes, there we go. So we have overland expansion with America and Russia, Manifest Destiny. Direct colonial control is an example there, which BJ was just talking about with 1857, after the Indian Revolt of 1857. He was talking about in South Africa, the settler colonies. And then, of course, the example of China being economic imperialism. Never forget as well, America, intervention in Latin America. So the United States intervention in Latin America is also going to be another form of economic imperialism that we'll see as part of Unit 6. Okay, the last part of Unit 6, separate from, we covered the consequences of imperialism or the consequences of industrialization or imperialism is migration. Different types of migration are happening during this time period, but it's pretty simple. People go to where there are jobs. So the places that people go to the places that they go are determined by where there are economic opportunities. The question here is, what are the push and pull factors for migration? The pull factor would be new economic opportunities. A push factor would be things that are driving people out, mainly political instability or other kinds of perhaps a lack of economic opportunities. The first thing that's going to lead to a cause of migration is a demand for a new source of labor. Because of the spread of Enlightenment ideas and all of those social reform movements like abolitionism, you have the abolition of slavery. But there still is sugar to be harvested. There are still cash crop plantations that drive the global economy. So that leads to Asian indentured servitude. For example, there are a lot of South Asians, a lot of descendants of Indians in Trinidad. Why? Because of migration in this time period. In the 19th century, they moved under work contracts to work in places like the Caribbean in order to get jobs. Now, there's two different things that happen. One is new migrants form ethnic enclaves where they just reproduce their culture in their new place. And other times they will assimilate to the population. But there are large numbers. It's called a diaspora, right? A diaspora is a group of people living outside their cultural homeland. There are large numbers of South Asians and East Asians at this time period as well. Chinese, like for example, in the United States, Chinese coming over to work on the railroads. So you have Chinese immigrants and South Asian immigrants who are going to new places. You also have the expansion of empires. So for example, Trinidad and Tobago was controlled by the British. South Asia was controlled by the British. So a lot of times where they went was also a place with which they were familiar because they were part of the same empire. You also have migration to cities. New jobs emerged in new industrialized urban centers like New York, and instability and economic hardship. So those are the general push and pull factors that fueled migration at this time period. And this last question on the packet, actually for Unit 6, I think BJ already answered, which is how is an imperialism in China different from Africa and South Asia? And he answered it by talking about the economic imperialism of China. So, and as I mentioned, there are these, the consequences of these patterns of migration are sometimes there are ethnic enclaves which are formed. That's an important term to know. If you don't know it, just know it. It's just like communities that within that community, like for example, Chinatown or Little Italy, you have the language that is spoken and the culture different than the culture of the new place, the main place. So, and then there's xenophobic backlash. An example of that would be the Chinese Exclusion Act. Wherever there is migration, there is also nativism, a nativist backlash where people reject immigration and push back against it. Another example is like the White Australia policy. Literally, the White Australia policy is whites only allowed into Australia. Why? Up until like 1970, from 1901 to like 1970. The reason why is because they were explicitly trying to keep out Asians. So that is all part of this time period, which is people are moving to new places because of industrialization and because of the abolition of slavery. They're moving to these new places for jobs, and there's a backlash against them as a result, a xenophobic backlash. And that should wrap up Unit 6, I believe. This is that cause and effect thing, which will be available for you later if you want to go back. It says here, like in the packet summary, this is the kind of thing you can go back and look at for your summary: causation, comparison. And it is also something we're going to circle back to when on the final night. We're going to pull it all together and look at those things. But now we have our Unit 6 quiz.
So I am struggling to get the Unit 6 quiz to work. It's not behaving for me. So I think we might have to, yeah. Hi, this is awkward. Like I just said something wrong, but I didn't. I just push a button, it didn't work.
Well, while you're pulling that up, trying to figure that out, there was a question about number 28. The greater gap between wealth caused by industrialization inevitably led to the rise of, that's a grammatically incorrect question, but that's fine. That is the global economic inequality, which leads to the movement of people to new places, from places that were kind of like left out of industrialization to places where there are new jobs for industrialization. So you could just connect it back to the movement of people, from what's generally referred to as the global south, to these places that have the new jobs, which are places like New York City or plantations in like the Caribbean that still need some labor.
I think I might have fixed it. I'm not really having a lot of confidence in myself right now. All right, we're going to go for a few-minute quiz, and then we're going to get through 7 and 8, kind of like in a combined way for those who are like, how are we possibly going to finish this? Be good. We got it. I'm going to go ahead here in the chat and drop this in. Hopefully that link works. I'm going to go over to the side. All right, so some of you are going to be using your phone. Some of you are going to be using the link. Here's the link again. We have 49 if you are there. Hey, Cynthia, it works. Can I hear you? Cynthia.
Can you hear me?
Cool, then I'm going to leave and let you narrate.
let's see the answer. We got a bunch of responses on this one. I cut out Sophia. It's frozen. So I'm gonna take over narrating. Okay, you guys. So Ethiopia and Liberia was the answer to this one. That's okay. Just mark it down. Remember for next time. Let's go to the next question. Moving forward here. Which of these movements resisted U.S. expansion into the Great Plains in the late 1800s? Was it the Seminole War? Was it the Bosnian? Was it the Yas-San-Tesla War? Or was it Jubilee? See what you guys think. Try to think of like regional wise, right? Like if you can picture a map and then like where everything is. We got a bunch of answers going. Good. Okay, let's see that answer. We got a good chunk. Okay, nice. Good one. Just mark this down as well. And let's see that next question. What item drove the global networks of exchange? Was it silk, silver, spices, or gold? Go. Responses in. We're almost done, guys. Thanks for sticking with us. Thanks for pulling through. Like, we're so proud of all of you. Oh my gosh. All right, get them out. Let's see. Okay, nice. So it was silver. Silver was worth a lot at this point. Every nation was like desperate to get their hands on some silver. So that kind of drove everything into place, right? Gold wasn't as common. Spices was more in the past, and silk was Silk Road, more in the past units. Okay, let's move on. Which of the following policies directly led to the Opium Wars? Oh, this is China. Okay, was it the mandate that they put on the civil service exam? Was it the Canton system used for trade? Was it the annexation of Japan? Or was it the conquering of Central Asia? Let's see what you guys think. Let's get some answers in. Guys. Okay, let's see that answer. Okay, nice, you guys. So it was the trade system, because remember that the Opium Wars were involved with trade between Britain and China. Okay, let's see the next question. The Opium Wars were fought between, let's see who is listening. Was it Great Britain and India after British insistence on opium production and food shortages and starvation across India? Was it B, Great Britain and China, which sought to eradicate illegal imports of Indian opium? Was it C, China and Japan, over who would have exclusive rights to sell opium? Or was it Great Britain and America or rights to trade opium? All right, we got a good percent, 96. Very proud of you all. Thanks for listening in. Okay, which term best shows American justification for moving west? Industrial expansion, manifest destiny, Indian Removal Act, or white man's burden? Keep it going, guys. Okay, just as a side note, let's try and keep the chat related to what we're doing here. And let's try and keep our answers world history related. We are all one big, happy world history family. And so we're going to act that way in the chat. Okay, great job, you guys. 72%. Manifest destiny. Remember that whole mindset. We need to move west. It's our destiny to get more expanded. Okay, let's keep going. What was the stated purpose of the Natal Indian Congress founded by Mahatma Gandhi? Was it to combat segregation in India, to advocate for further integration into Great Britain as a sovereign country of the UK in its own right instead of a colony? Was it to aid the British colonial authorities in suppressing Muslim separatists? Or to combat discrimination against Indian traders in South Africa? Right. I got this one. Think of Gandhi. I love Gandhi. My favorite leaders. Okay, so that one was kind of low. So Gandhi, you might not know or remember, that's okay. Gandhi worked really hard to promote equality and to combat discrimination. Some of his like most famous things were like the walk to the sea with the salt. He's kind of comparable to Martin Luther King Jr., if I remember correctly, but in India in this time period. Okay, next question. As a result of overproduction, international trade transformed industrial economies from blank to blank systems. Was it capitalist to mercantilist, mercantilist to capitalist, communist to mercantilist, or communist to capitalist? Okay, keep those answers going. Okay, keep going. Let's see. Okay, nice. Good job, you guys. Mostly got that. I don't know. Okay. What changes did the French Revolution bring about? Was it the defeat of anti-monarchist movement and continuation of the House of Bourbon's rule, dissolution of France into smaller sub-states, the overthrow of Louis and replacement with a republic-style government continuously up to the present day, or the overthrow of Louis and replacement with republic-style government for a brief period? See. Okay, keep those answers going, you guys. Going. Right. Let's see. Okay, not bad. The French Revolution, remember its changes. It had more effects on like other countries. And hey, we're back. I'll see you guys. So proud of you. Keep sticking in. Almost half an hour left.
Very good. Thank you so much, Deb. I love your attitude, your positiveness. I appreciate it. And I think everybody else here appreciates it. So we just did a quiz break, as you know. The idea is to get you to understand that Fiveable has an entire question set that you can access outside of one of these cram nights and as a practice, as a review. So I do know that a lot of kids have been using it before, and maybe that is going to be something you'll want to do for review. So we are going to jump into period 4, the last of the 4 periods, 1900 to the present. And the way we break that up is we break it up into units 7, 8, and 9. We hope here at Fiveable that your teacher recently taught you units 7, 8, or 9. I don't know. I just hope that, right? So Unit 7 is going to be on global conflict, and it's largely World War I, World War II, and genocide. Then Unit 8 is Cold War and decolonization. We hope to cover those both tonight. So let's see what we can do here. Unit 7, 8, global conflict, Cold War, and decolonization. So first, when you look at 7.1, we have to understand that this is a great time period of transition. That sounds cool. Transition, change. The Russian land-based empire falling. The Qing land-based empire falling. The Ottoman land-based empire falling. So if you go all the way back to Unit 3, we have land-based empires emerging. Now we are seeing them fall. We have to ask why. Russia has economic inequality. It has had autocracy for.
Hey, BJ.
Yeah.
It says that they can't see the slides. I'm not sure why. Do you want to like unshare and then share it again? I can see the slides fine, but there's a lot of people who say they can't see the slides. So maybe we could just like, unshare.
Really? I would think just seeing me would be good enough, but they're like,
yeah, I know, really? That's right.
Lightly offended. All right, I guess they'll go ahead and share their feelings because they're very good at that. How are we doing now? Give us some feedback. What can we see, everybody? It's back. I saw one person say it. So you really messed up my flow, everybody. I got no game now. All right. So the Russians had a certain family line that had an autocratic rule, and they tried to change, but it didn't change enough. And then they led themselves into World War One, thinking that fighting and having success in World War One would bring power to the Russians, and the opposite happens. And we will see the fall of the dynastic system in Russia. Tsar Nicholas II, he and his family will die. Russia will go into the Russian Revolution. You should read about that. You could call it the Russian Revolution. You could call it the Bolshevik Revolution. Just type in Lenin, Lenin, and you'll be happy. At the same time, we have the Qing, the Manchu. They were foreign rulers from Manchuria who had come down, taken over China, created the Qing Empire, the Qing dynasty. And they just had a hard time dealing with the foreign intrusion. The foreign intrusion from the British specifically, but the Japanese, the Russians, and the French were all knocking on the door. Without the ability to change, the Qing dynasty will fall. The last emperor, Emperor Puyi, will abdicate his throne, and a new government will come in called the Republic of China. An individual named Sun Yat-sen will help lead this change into the Republic of China. So we have Vladimir Lenin leading change in Russia. We have Sun Yat-sen leading change in China. Just because there's change, it doesn't mean it's going to be successful. It's a transition. The Ottomans, which we've already talked a bit, they tried to adapt, and through World War I, they are going to see the entire Middle East, the Ottoman Empire, cut up into British and French mandates, meaning regions taken over by the victors of World War I. In that Ottoman collapse, Turkey will emerge, and it will fight for independence from the British, and you will see the Republic of Turkey emerge, largely based off of those Tanzimat reforms from the mid-1800s. So this is an era of transition. Another transitional is going to be in the Americas with the Mexican Revolution. The Mexican Revolution should not be considered the Mexican War for Independence that had gone back with Father Manuel Hidalgo. We're talking the early 1900s, where the Americans held much of the oil wealth in Mexico. And there's something I teach in my students called the dependency theory, where the elite of Mexico were working with the elite of America for the benefit of the elite. And people like Porfirio Diaz, the dictator of Mexico at that time, he too maintained stability with this dirty relationship. There will be an internal revolution, and the Mexican Revolution will lead to a new constitution. You're going to see oil will be nationalized. So no longer can Americans own the oil of Mexico. Rather, they can buy the oil of Mexico, and Mexico owns its own oil. There'll even be land reform. So yeah, tons of transitions going on all different continents. In the aftermath of all of this, I'm bleeding into what Amy was going to prep. So I'm actually going to pause. I'm going to pass this to Amy so she can share her breakdown of the fall of the Ottomans.
No. Okay. This is late night. It's getting kind of crazy in here. Okay. So the most important thing to know about the fall of the Ottoman Empire is that it happens directly as a consequence of World War I. And then it leads to, so there's some internal factors that happen leading up to it. The Ottomans failed to industrialize. And of course, there's rising nationalism, which is going to pull at the fabric of the Ottoman Empire. But ultimately, the thing that kills the Ottomans is World War I. You can think of that as similar in some ways to the Russian Revolution, and that there's all sorts of things going wrong for Nicholas II and the Russians beforehand. But the devastation of the world of World War I is really a pivotal factor. So when you're comparing the fall of empires, World War I for the Ottomans and the Russians is really important. After the fall of the Ottoman Empire, you have the creation of a new state, a nation state called Turkey. So Turkey is a nation state established by Ataturk, who is a nationalist, who wants to establish a secular nation state. Forget the Ottoman past, forget Islam, forget the whole idea of a sultan or a caliph. He wants Turkey to be a modern secular nation state, just like all the other nation states that were being created at the time. The rest of the Ottoman Empire gets divided up into mandates, as Vijay talked about. And then the map you can see here and the same one on the next slide really show how this mandate system works. The mandate system is just where it's a nicer way of saying colonies. Mainly the territory of the Ottoman Empire and the territories of the German Empire, the colonies of the German Empire, are just given to the other empires, the British, the French, and the Japanese. So this is going to become even more complicated, as you'll see in the next. Because the Ottoman Empire, when the Middle East is broken up, minus the nation state of Turkey, which Ataturk is able to negotiate through a series of battles and deals with the British, an independent state for Turkey on the Anatolian Peninsula, the rest of the Middle East is kind of up for grabs. During World War I, the British and the French met secretly together and decided that they would divide the Middle East into spheres of influence. You can see a map here. This was called Sykes-Picot Agreement. A guy named Sykes from the British and a guy named Picot from the French met secretly and said, after the Ottomans are defeated, let's divvy up the territory. But they didn't say that publicly. Publicly, they said the Arabs should have a nation state. Like they promised encouraged Arab nationalism because it helped them against the Ottomans. They were fighting the Ottomans in World War I. And then they also publicly said, and throw in a Jewish state. So they encouraged Arab nationalism because it helped them defeat the Ottomans. They promised a Jewish state, and secretly, they just wanted the territory for themselves. So that basically creates the problems and the difficulties with the Middle East. For centuries, it was just controlled by the Ottomans for a long time. But now there's going to be contested borders, which is a theme in the 20th century, contested borders. Where should those lines be? The Europeans made it really complicated after World War I. This part right here corresponds with the first part in your packet. What were the main causes for World War I? What is total war and why is it significant? How did World War I contribute to the start of World War II? Usually these are the units that students are most familiar with. But I think there's a couple of different things that are important to note. Unit 7 is called Global Conflict, and it's basically the World Wars plus the Great Depression. The Cold War is Unit 8, and also decolonization is Unit 8. And those two things are connected. So 2 things to know about the World Wars that are important for Unit 7 are that they used new technologies. So these technologies would include, like, for example, submarines, airplanes, tanks, machine guns, poison gas, and trench warfare in the case of World War I. And then in World War II, you have the introduction of like firebombing using napalm. They actually have bombers that can go relatively long distances, throw in some aircraft carriers. And now all over the world, you have the Allied forces who are just like ripping into Axis cities like Tokyo and Dresden and destroying them. And then you have the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So World War I and World War II, because of these new technologies, are incredibly destructive. Added on to that, the Holocaust. And not only genocide, but also earlier in World War I, technically the first modern genocide, the term genocide becomes used to refer to the Armenians. And then finally, the last part of global conflict, Unit 7, before we move on to Unit 8 and 9, is the home front. So World War I and World War II, because they are total wars, mean that we're not only talking about what's going on the battlefield, everybody at home, their lives are changed. Women and their workforce, children having to ration their food, all of the economy mobilized to support the war effort abroad, at the battlefront. That has an impact on the home front. And the significance of that is it's going to lead to social change. So if you were thinking about global conflict and you're thinking about the world wars, don't just think about the battles. Think about how people at home are affected and how their lives are changed and how that's going to impact social movements afterward, particularly for women, for colonized people who were fighting in these wars as well, and for marginalized groups at home, like in the United States with African Americans. So these world wars result in social change on the home front. And I believe we're ready for Unit 7 quiz. Is that right? Or do we, yeah. Oh yes, contested borders. Everybody's probably familiar with this one. The nation state of Israel, which although it doesn't get its official independence recognized by the UN until 1948, it has its origins as a nation state earlier than that with, the mandate system that was created and all those secret deals that were happening between the British and the French to really control that territory for themselves, although promising it to others during World War I. So the story of Unit 8 is going to be nationalism. Do we have a separate Unit 7 quiz? Or do we combine those?
I think we're just going to save them for what time we have later on.
Okay, that sounds good. You know why? Because this is my favorite unit. Unit 8, Cold War and decolonization. They go hand in hand. So decolonization refers to the creation of independent states from the breakup of empires. It begins in World War I, but it really accelerates after World War II. And the creation, like in the United Nations now, I know that BJ probably knows this because he's also a model UN sponsor, but there's like 193 official recognized nations. And in addition to all these other territories. So this happens, most of those nations are created in the aftermath of World War II with the breakup of global empires. And what causes these nations, one of the main causes is anti-colonial nationalisms. People pushing back and saying they want to create their own nations, like Ataturk did after World War I. You have the continuation of that after World War II in Africa and in Asia. So one particular type of nationalism is going to happen in the Arab world. This is Arab nationalism, which all these new nation states are being created at the same time that the international structure has changed. So the Cold War has happened, and the Cold War is a bipolar ideological struggle between the United States and the Soviet Union. From 1945, if you consider the Potsdam Conference, until 1991, which means every state created between 1945 to 1991 is going to be pressured to choose sides. So there are some people, some countries who are going to resist having to choose sides. They're new countries. They don't want to be in this position, but there's two global superpowers that come out of World War II. But this group of countries are called the non-aligned movement. They don't want to pick sides. They want to be independent and be their own country without having to, negotiate this like Cold War conflict between the United States and the Soviet Union. So the person here in front of you is Gamal Abdel al-Nasser, who is the head of Egypt, and after I think like 1953, 54, there was a coup in 52, and then he came to power. So there's a couple of things. He's a great example because he's like a bunch of things. One, he's a nationalist, and he's an Arab nationalist. He doesn't just want Egypt for Egyptians. He wants to like unite the Arab world, in particular Egypt and Syria, into like a pan-Arab state and a pan-Arab alliance. Also, he tries to invade Israel a bunch of times. So that's part of how he tries to get this, is he has a series of wars to invade Israel. And he's part of the non-aligned movement. So those are Those are important things. Like he's an example of a lot of things going on. Pan-Arabism, Arab nationalism, the non-aligned movement, as in like he's going to the conferences, he's part of this organization. Other people in the non-aligned movement, you can put in the chat. Who do you guys know in the non-aligned movement?
Some have said India.
We've got Nehru in India, Tito in Yugoslavia. Who's your favorite non-aligned person? Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana is probably like some of the most interesting. Don't forget Sukarno in Indonesia, Tito in Yugoslavia. These are people who come together. Don't talk about the Cold War without talking about the non-aligned movement. Now, some of you are saying, who's this Nasser guy again? Nasser is a leader of Egypt in the 1950s who pushes back against the West. He's trying to he's pushing back. He's part of the non-aligned movement. He's pushing back against the entire system. And he is promoting Arab nationalism. So he's a nationalist leader. And he's trying to modernize his country. So the thing that he does that's particularly controversial, other than also trying to invade Israel a bunch of times, is he nationalizes the Suez Canal in 1956 that creates a crisis. Why he nationalizes the Suez Canal is to raise money in order to fund a dam that will modernize his country. So he's mad at the United States because the United States won't fund the dam. The Soviets offered to give him some money, but they're going to charge him like as a loan. He doesn't want the loan. So he just gets tired of the United States. He gets tired of the Soviet Union. He nationalizes the Suez Canal, which was owned by the British Corporation. And this prompts, it's just an example of what's going on in the Cold War. Individual leaders making decisions, trying to play the United States and the Soviet Union off of each other for their own national interests.
Nasser is somebody you should actually have in your back pocket. That's good stuff right there. All right. Thank you so much, Amy. We're going to jump into kind of like bringing things to a close on Unit 8. So let's just review a little bit. Unit 7 is going to be global conflict, World War I, World War II, and genocide, which we're really not talking about here tonight. Unit 8 is going to be about Cold War and decolonization. I'm multitasking right now, and it's not looking good. Now, I can go forever here, but I can't. So this is what I did my undergraduate thesis on, Mao Zedong. Here you go. You have 1 minute. Mao Zedong is a great example of the Cold War conflict outside of Russia and the United States. So how did it affect China? In 1949, Mao Zedong will defeat the nationalist government and create the People's Republic of China, PRC. He will institute eventually the Great Leap Forward, creating communes that were meant to be self-sufficient in both agriculture and industry. And it was an epic failure. Mao Zedong's attempt to apply communism to an agrarian nation that did not have urban centers, that did not have industry, but have them create steel themselves on farms, failed. And the largest man-made famine starts. About 10 years later, another thing led by Mao Zedong was the Great Proletarian Cultural Revolution, or just known as the Cultural Revolution. Mao Zedong just gives up on this idea of creating like an industrial communal society, and he just goes after ideology. He cancels school for 3 years. Why does that matter to me? He cancels school from 1966 to 1969 so people can like stop learning, go onto the fields and work with their hands, be amongst the people. This is when baby boomers are going to college in large swaths. So we have an entire baby boom generation that's going to college, getting master's degree, or going to Woodstock in 1969. China has an entire generation of people that are now being held back. And they're going to be inspired to fight back in the 80s and 90s and evolve. But yes, it really slows the development. So Mao Zedong fails to implement communism in China, period. Fails. The new communist government that will follow him will leave his cult of personality and dramatically change. But we're going to study that in Unit 9. The fall of the Soviet Union is not tied to China. So China is its own case study in communism. Well, we're going to see that by the 1980s, this command economy is failing to evolve and lead in terms of car production, clothes production. They're not making the Nikes of the world market. They enter a war in Afghanistan that a lot of people like to tie to being their Vietnam. So it's a war that seemingly is dragging. It's getting backlash from the people, and they're fighting nationalist movements in Afghanistan like we fought in Vietnam. So almost unwinnable. Yes, Chernobyl does happen. So we're seeing that they're fragile. They're not even able to have a good nuclear program. And then a guy by the name of Mikhail Gorbachev, look at the name, Mikhail Gorbachev. He comes out and he says, we need to change. We need to evolve. We need glasnost, which is openness. We need perestroika, which is restructuring. No matter what you understood of what I just said, he said we need to westernize. It's kind of like the Meiji Restoration in the 1800s. We need to westernize. The Tanzimat reforms, we need to westernize. Gorbachev says our Stalinistic system has failed us. So Mikhail Gorbachev will be the final communist leader of Russia. There will be an internal rebellion that leads to the passage to President Boris Yeltsin. The Berlin Wall falls in 89. In 1990, you'll see West and East Germany reunite. And in 1991, the Soviet Union is no more. To wrap this up, we have a couple slides, but these are the slides that we don't want to go into great detail because we want to do some quizzes. So causation slide, comparison slide, CCOT slide. Review those at your leisure. It is time for a quiz break. I'm hoping that we have enough time for a couple questions from Unit 7 and a couple questions from Unit 8. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and get Unit 7 ready to go. Unit 7, we're just going to do about 10 questions from. And I'm going to drop into that here. Go ahead and join. Satellite. We're at 60 some. All right, I think we're ready to go ahead and get started.
Can you hear me?
No, Adeline. I'm going to kick you off the stage. This is Adeline's quiz. I'll help out here. Which of the following was most commonly referred to as the stickman of Europe? We're going to reveal the answer, and it's the Ottomans, and it falls in World War One, like Russia, having its own upheavals. Let's go to our next question. Which of the following was a significant cause of the Russian Revolution? That's a pretty wordy question, but they're good. God is upset that I kicked Adeline out. Let's reveal. Nice. To be honest, if Tsar Nicholas II successfully joined World War I and let's just say won it, then we wouldn't be talking about it. But yes, it was a massive failure militarily. Let's move on. This broke force Ottoman Sultan Abdul Hamid historic constitutional government in 1900. Her name has been used a couple times today. And that is going to be the Young Turks. Excellent. Next question. The 1911 revolution led by Sun Yat-sen and China overthrew what? What was overthrown in 1911? All right, ready. It is the Qing dynasty or the Manchu dynasty. Great. Next question. Which of the following was a significant effect of the scramble for Africa on the outbreak of World War I? Let's go ahead and give that an answer. That one's going to be pretty hard, I think. I got 2 people, 3 people. I feel like I'm playing by myself. It's like my 12th birthday where no one was really at my party, just me hanging out alone, eating Ilios. All right, we got 110. All right, it's better than my 12th birthday party. And let's reveal. Ready, set, and go. And we have it contributed to the competition for colonies and territories, leading to the diplomatic tensions and military conflict. Great answer. I like that. Which of the following correctly corresponding mnemonic devices defines the ultimate causes of World War I, the Great War? Just pedaling again. What a power. I kind of wish I had this power in my classroom. And the answer is M-A-I-N. Not necessarily in that order, all right? Maine. Let's do one more for this year. During World War I, various governments attempted to mobilize as many of their society's resources to achieve victory. This is known as... Three, two, one. Answer is total war. Very good. Thank you so much. All right. In the interest of time, because I see 9:56, I'm going to bring us all the way back to our original slideshow. Walk us through it. We got through everything. And I know a lot of you are going to say, boy, we rushed through things. But at the end of the day, I promise you this, what we'll be doing over the next few nights with the DBQ, the LEQ, the SAQ is huge. And we really wanted to get through the content quickly to get to that. So here is our team. We were working behind the scenes to answer your question and sometimes remind you to stay focused. Tomorrow night, we're going to meet and we're going to be on Unit 9, which some of you haven't even gotten to, and I understand that, and the DBQ. That's going to be my baby. I can't wait. Don't forget to use @5ablecrams and share some sort of feelings about your cram finale experiences. Don't forget to follow @Think5able on your social medias. Before we say goodnight, there is an AP World Night 2 survey at the bottom. It's in a green little button. I would really, really ask you to all click that and fill that out before you leave tonight. I'm going to let Amy have the last word and she can sign us out.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, you guys are amazing. You've gone through like 6 hours of content. We're like really encouraged. We're really proud of you. We appreciate your participation. And we look forward to finishing up this content, Unit 9, globalization, and then BJ's like masterclass in the DBQ. We're going to get you where you need to be. And thank you for hanging with us. So we'll see you tomorrow night, same place, same time.
Excellent. Please remember, fill out that Night 2 survey. Thank you for those who are engaged. See you tomorrow.